Is Sony finally ready to compete with Game Pass? Sony just bought a new studio, we have some updates on the GTA Trilogy, and we know who's developing the Twisted Metal reboot. I know we got Jeff Grubb out there leaking every game in existence, but it turns out South Korea is the real MVP because not only are they the ones who leaked the amazing Castlevania Advance Collection, which is on PS4 right now, you should definitely check it out, they're also the ones who are leaking the new GTA Trilogy of remastered games that we've been hearing about for about a month now. But if you haven't heard of this somehow, it's basically a remastered trilogy of the PS2 games in the Grand Theft Auto series. So you're getting GTA 3, GTA Vice City, and GTA San Andreas made playable on modern consoles, because I don't know if you guys have gone back and played those games recently, but they are all pretty rough. Now, unfortunately, that doesn't really tell us when this game is coming out. It could be like next week or it could be in 3 months, because when a game gets rated over in South Korea, it's not like, oh, you guys have submitted this and that means it's going to come out in X number of days. It just doesn't work like that. Like with Castlevania, that was rated, I think, back in June around E3, and then slowly box art started to leak, and then now we have the game 3 months later. June, July, August to September, like 4 months later. You know, 3-4 months, it doesn't really matter. The point is, we can't predict when the games are coming out. But the fact that they've been rated means the games are basically done. It means they've gone gold, they're content complete, and essentially, besides some bug fixing, I would guess they're ready to go. So I don't think we'll be waiting all that long to see these. And they're supposed to have a mix of new and old graphics, which honestly got me thinking, like, what are they going to change and how much are they going to change? Because I don't really think they're going to get in a lot of trouble for changing just the core way that these games play. If they can modernize the gameplay and sort of make them play a lot more like GTA 5, where you've got third person and first person combat, you actually shoot and reload like a third person shooter, I think that would go a long way, because yeah, I recently played these and they just don't control right. I think that's where a lot of the work needs to go. A lot of the repeated textures and stuff like that, but I don't need this game to look like GTA 5. I want it to keep the core identity of what these games initially looked like. And if you ask me, when you lay all three of these out, which one I'm most excited to play, I'm gonna go with Vice City, because that's the one that I've always wanted to love, but by the time I got to it, it was too old feeling and like sluggish feeling where I really couldn't get into it. But you've got such an awesome game there. It's set in the 80s, it's set in Miami, well, their version of Miami. You've got Ray Liotta as the main character. You've got a ton of other actors from gangster movies that I grew up watching. Like, that's the one where I'm like, yes, if you can modernize this, get the gameplay tuned up, make it feel like a little bit more of a modern game, but still feel like a PS2 era game, that's going to be the sweet spot for me. I'm going to dive right in. Like, I like these collections. I like that they're usually cheaper, but there's always just one game that I'm really excited for. I mentioned Castlevania a few times. I got the whole trilogy, right? Because it's only $20, but the game I immediately jumped into is Aria of Sorrow, because that is far and away, in my opinion at least, the best Castlevania game. And from what I've heard, Vice City might be the best GTA game. And just doing a little bit more research here on the fly, there's two conflicting rumors going on about when this game's going to come out. One says we're going to get it at the end of this year, one says we're going to get it early next year. Either way, I'm excited. I'm glad this is definitely turning out to be real, because it could have been one of those announcements where it's like stuff people really wanted for a long time, someone faked some box art or something, and then it just never turns out to be real. I hate stuff like that, so I'm glad that this is real. The other game in the trilogy I'd be really curious to play is GTA 3, because that's the oldest game in this trilogy. It's the first open world Grand Theft Auto game in the third person perspective. The other ones were like a top down perspective, even though it's the third game in the Grand Theft Auto universe. I think it's actually like the fifth or sixth. There were a lot more before it, but this is the one that really just, you know, got Rockstar where they are today, got them their big open world crime simulator, and that would be the coolest one to see remastered to go back and experience. Now, I've actually played it before because I had GTA Liberty City Stories, which was the same map but a new story, and then I went and got GTA 3 for PS2 and I played through it. It's very old and sluggish feeling now, but like, yeah, that's one I would really like to see remastered. And while they're at it, if this trilogy does well, I really hope they also go back and do the PSP games. There's only 2 of them. They had Liberty City Stories and Vice City Stories. Again, those use the same maps as GTA 3 and GTA Vice City, but they had new stories in them. Both are incredible games. They were kind of like defining games for the PSP, and I don't think it's out of the question to remaster them, because both of those games got ported to the PS2. And hell, while they're at it, why not do Chinatown Wars? Love that game. I played it on my DS and I played it on my iPod Touch 2nd gen. And speaking of that, they should bring it back on the iPhone, because that game was sick. Rockstar, what I'm saying is stop messing around with GTA Online and Red Dead Online and whatever the hell else you got going on online, and just look at your back catalog of incredible games and start remastering them. This is a great start you've got with this trilogy, but we need Bully, we need the PSP games, we need the Warriors. I don't know if you guys ever played that, but Rockstar made a sweet Warriors game. They've got a ton of old games that need remasters. That's all I'm saying. But yeah, guys, I've been having a ton of fun covering this GTA trilogy thing because I don't know, I'm just really interested in it. So if you think it's cool and you want to hear more about it, let me know in the comments, and also remember to subscribe and set your notifications to all. We all know what's going on over at Microsoft at this point. They're basically going around and trying to find studios that they think would fit into their little ecosystem that they're building out and buying up these studios, and Sony has kind of been quiet before this year about buying new studios, but recently they've been on a kick buying up a ton of teams. We got Firespite going over to them, and now we have their classic studio. The newest PlayStation studio in the making, Bluepoint, has officially joined PlayStation, and they are working on a new game. So this acquisition was announced earlier today, and like I mentioned, they're working on a new game and not a remake or another reboot like everyone thought they would be working on. And honestly, that's where I'm like, why, right? Like, they proved themselves definitely by building up as a remake studio. They started with Shadow of the Colossus. That was an incredible remake. It sold for like 40 bucks on the PS4. The graphics were incredible. On PS4 Pro, it looked and played amazing. They, of course, just remade Demon's Souls, which we're going to talk about in a second, and they did an incredible job there. So I'd be really curious what this new game is, because they don't necessarily say that it's like a new IP from them, just that it's a new original game. And that leaves the door wide open, because they could be playing in a bunch of other sandboxes. Because every time we talk about Bluepoint, I gotta bring up this tweet they did, I think last Halloween, where it was very cryptic, but they basically teased a new Castlevania, Metal Gear, like Resistance, all these different franchises in Sony's wheelhouse and Konami's wheelhouse, and it was like, oh, are you guys working on remaking all these games? And we haven't heard anything about any of those. But instead of a remake, if they're working on new stuff, that's what I want to see, because you know what the first thing I think of is they just did a remake of a From Software game, right? They made Demon's Souls, the first, Souls game in the entire series. Why don't they go back to Bloodborne and finally give us the sequel we want to that, alongside a PC and PS5 patch for the original Bloodborne? PC release and PS5 patch. Those are two separate ideas. Please do not let me know down in the comments. And as cool as that sounds, again, I gotta go back to that tweet. I think Silent Hill was also referenced there. So what if they're the ones picking up the mantle from Kojima on Silent Hills, and they're going to be the ones rebooting the Silent Hill universe? Or they could do Castlevania, which would be awesome. They could also do Metal Gear. They could give us a new Metal Gear Solid game, not necessarily a reboot, maybe a Metal Gear Solid 6 that works as a reboot. There are so many possibilities with Bluepoint, and the fact of the matter is, now that they're underneath Sony's umbrella, they've got all of this money that they can play around with. Sony's the one who's going to go out and get them these IPs. Sony's the one bringing the IPs to them, for they can go in this little sandbox, this big box of IPs, and just pick and choose anything they want to work with. Yeah, I'd love to see an original game, right? I'm glad they're making that, but I really hope they're going to be the studio that goes back and revives old IP. You know what else is sitting there? Infamous. We got Sly Cooper just sitting there. We got all these franchises just sitting around collecting dust. That's the whole point. They can play around with those. They could probably do something great, because we know after the last few games they've made that they know how to remake a game. And interestingly, alongside this acquisition news, we finally found out how many copies the Demon's Souls remake sold for the PS5, because they said in the press release that it's now sold right over 1.4 million copies. Now, this could be taken a few different ways. So if you take this Demon's Souls remake and compare it to the original Demon's Souls, which came out all the way back on the PS3, that is incredible, because they tripled the sales of the original Demon's Souls. That one, the last time the numbers came out, it sold around 500,000 copies. Now we're almost at 1.5 million with the new one. That's a pretty big upturn in sales. They made it a franchise technically. But when you compare it to these games that Sony has, like Spider-Man, which are selling like tens of millions of copies, that's where it gets a little bit different. And that's what kind of made me nervous initially before I saw that Bluepoint was bought, because the last time a game sold like less than other PlayStation exclusives, it ended up with the studio being closed. Because the last time Sony wasn't happy with a game's sales, even though it was profitable, was Days Gone, and we all know how that turned out. They got put on a new Uncharted game, and they weren't allowed to make Days Gone 2, and they ended up losing two of their core members that had been there at Bend Studios since the very beginning. So it's good to know that Sony is happy with these 1.4 1.5 million sales of the Demon's Souls remake to the point where they were willing to buy Bluepoint, you know? And also, I don't think Demon's Souls was that expensive of a game. You're working with a remake, you already have the structure all figured out, you already have the way the game should play all figured out, so you don't really have to do too much pre-production work there. You're basically just making new art, making new graphics, rebuilding the game from the ground up over the core engine. Those remakes like that aren't as expensive as making a whole new Souls-like game. Like if they made Bloodborne 2, it would be a lot more expensive and 1.5 million sales would be considered a failure. And another reason I'm happy that 1.5 million sales is good for Sony on Demon's Souls is that that's good for Bluepoint being able to go back and play around with smaller IP Sony has. We know that their big focus right now is making AAA, quadruple A, blockbuster games that can come out with their movies, and they just shut down Japan Studio because of that, because they were making smaller games. But I don't know, I feel like Bluepoint can sit comfortably there making games that are profitable, but they can keep their budgets in check, and I feel like that's exactly what they need to do. And when you contrast Sony's strategy with Microsoft, where Sony actually waits to see what these studios can do before buying them, instead of buying studios and then saying, all right, here's a bunch of money, go nuts, and then just crossing their fingers that it's going to work out, I'm happy about that. I think Sony's making the smart call. We saw what Bluepoint could do with Shadow of the Colossus, we saw what they could do with Demon's Souls, and then Sony said, all right guys, you did 2 good games, you got good reviews, you got good sales on both of them, we're going to buy you. I think that's the smartest way to do it, because just going out and flaunting money around and buying any studio that wants to get bought, that's a recipe for disaster in my opinion, because if they're looking to get bought, what does that mean, right? Like maybe they're coming off of a failed game, like we're seeing with Crystal Dynamics right now, coming off of Avengers, which by all accounts is basically a dismal failure. For some reason, they weren't busy right now and they could help Microsoft out with Perfect Dark, you know? Like that's why I don't like what Microsoft is doing as much as what Sony does, because they're going to studios that are coming off of failed games or games that didn't sell all that well and they need a cash infusion, and they're kind of just letting them go nuts, whereas Sony is going for a more like proven quality with all the studios they're picking up. Like the other studio that they just picked up, the VR one, they made a bunch of good VR games, they get rewarded by being bought by Sony, and they get a lot more money to make more VR games. It's like being rewarded for doing good work, and I think that's awesome. That's the way Sony should be running things in my opinion, because that's what got them to where they're at right now. In the PS4 generation specifically, that's exactly how they ran things, and they're doing the best they've ever done. I don't think I'm gonna make anyone mad if I say that PS Now is in a good spot compared to where it was a few years ago, right? They're putting PS4 games on there that you can actually download. They're getting some pretty big games like the Final Fantasy VII Remake, and they're making the streaming be able to go up to 1080p with PS3. Those are all good changes, but everyone's kind of sitting there wondering what's next for it. Is this going to become the big competitor to Game Pass? And if a patent Sony just filed is to be believed, that's exactly what they want to do with it, because they're patenting ultra low latency streaming. That's basically them saying, yeah, we want to make it so this thing can stream PS5 games. Now, at first I'll admit I was like, why would they want to do that? Because if you have a PS5, why would you want to stream PS5 games to your PS5? You just want to download them or go get the disc and pop that in, because you're going to have no latency, you're not going to have blocky textures all over the screen. It's just going to be a much better experience if you're natively playing the game on your console. So I went and I looked at what Xbox is doing with xCloud, and then it all started to make sense. So the big feature that xCloud streaming has for Xbox right now is that when games like Starfield or games like Contraband or games like Perfect Dark start coming out and they can't run on the original Xbox One or even maybe the Xbox Series X, that's where this xCloud streaming comes in. You can sign up for Game Pass Ultimate and you can stream those games to your older console and get the next gen experience while you wait to get a next gen console, which is super smart. I think it's not going to be used by all that many people, but if it gets a lot of people to sign up for Game Pass Ultimate, then Xbox ultimately wins, no pun intended. So on the flip side, with PlayStation Now, if Sony did the same thing with PS5 games, or when you're downloading a PS5 game or waiting for a patch to download or something like that, you could just boot up PS Now and play the PS5 games there, and then your save will transfer right back to your console and you'll be ready to go when the patch or the final game download. There's also a lot of utility in the fact that you could stream to your phone or your laptop or something like that if you're on the go, because we all know about this guy who bought 2 PS5s so he could travel with one, but who wants to travel with a PS5? I don't know. I know a lot of people can't get them, so maybe you haven't seen or held a PS5 in real life, but those things are massive, they're heavy. I would not feel safe putting that thing in a suitcase. So if I could just get on my computer and stream from my PS5 if I'm at a hotel or my parents' house in Michigan or something like that, that would be awesome. It would be a really cool halfway step, because that's what keeps me on the PlayStation, you know? Like if I have the ability to play these things when I travel, that's what's going to keep me in your ecosystem. That's why I like PC so much. When I go on vacation, I can bring my laptop and all of my saves, all of my games games are in Steam good to go. So the more stuff that Sony does to make sure they're keeping up with Microsoft in terms of making sure you can take your games out of the house and stuff like that, that's Sony future-proofing. And especially when you consider that the PS6 is coming, right? When the PS6 comes out, they're going to have a way to stream PS5 games. And the fact that they're thinking this far ahead, that's the Sony, again, that I like to see. This whole video is just like Sony making good move after good move. And it's awesome to see, right? We had that great showcase just a few weeks ago. We've got Sony buying Bluepoint. Now we've got them investing in the future with making sure that their streaming tech is up to snuff. Like, this is good. This is where I wanted Sony to be when the PS5 came out, and I was a little more critical of them. I think they're doing a lot of stuff right. Of course, because we're talking about taking your games on the go, though, the one thing that Sony, I think, really needs to step back and start investing in is a handheld. I played a Vita to compare it to the new Switch OLED, and I was honestly impressed at how many features the Vita has, a console from 2012 that the new Nintendo Switch, the Switch OLED, the one that comes out next week, does not have. It just got Bluetooth audio, but the Vita had that from the beginning. The Vita has online on the system. The Vita has trophies. Nintendo doesn't even have an achievement system. So Sony, they know how to make the console right. They know how to make the hardware. They just got to figure out a good software strategy that works, and they're able to do it on the console side. So I don't see why Sony, these people who have the best games in the entire industry, had such a hard time figuring out with the Vita. We've seen them commit to lower selling hardware like the PSVR because they're making a PSVR 2, so they just need to bring that commitment to a PS Vita 2 or PSP 3, whatever you want to call it. And if you're worried that PS Now is suddenly going to replace the games that you can store on your console, I don't think you have anything to worry about, because as long as Sony knows they can sell their games for $70 at that premium and people are going to wait in line at GameStop or show up at Best Buy day one and buy them, that's exactly what they're going to keep doing. That's where the profit margins are. That's where it's the best. And Sony can do that because they had a whole generation of banger after banger on the PS4. Like, they justify that price. They justify you going and buying a game individually with the quality of their games. I'm not saying Microsoft can't get there, but I don't think there's an argument in terms of what Microsoft is putting out on their first party versus what Sony is. It's not really even a contest. Microsoft is going for like a bunch of good quality games instead of Sony's going for a few amazing quality games. And that's just how it's been for a while, and for the foreseeable future, I think that's how it's going to stay. Anyway, guys, that's all the PlayStation news I have for you today. Make sure you let me know what you think of all of it down in the comments below. And remember to subscribe and set your notifications to all if you haven't already. As always, guys, my name is Jimmy Champagne, and I'll see you in the next one. Thanks for watching.